Hello, everyone, and welcome to Foundry Virtual Events, to our first skill up of Foundry Virtual Events. Really happy to see so many people online, and I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy at home. So before I hand over to Ariel, I just wanted to run through a couple of things. So a welcome from me. Hello, everyone. A quick video, and then we will go straight into Ariel's session, and then we'll have a live Q&A at the end as well. Just wanted to quickly introduce who's on stage today. So myself, my name is Joyce. I'm the Field Marketing Manager for Foundry EMEA. I'm here with my colleague Ariel, who is our very own Katana Creative Specialist at Foundry. And then we've got Martin here as well, our Head of Creative Services for EMEA Foundry. So before we dive straight into that, I just wanted to give you a quick update on what's happening at Foundry Virtual Events. So we've just launched this a couple of weeks ago. I'm really excited to kind of have this on board now. So we've broken these virtual events into 3 different sections. So we will have webinars, skill ups, and sessions. Webinars will be more technical deep dives. Skill ups are more from an educational aspect, and sessions will be more where we will bring in external studios who will do a VFX breakdown and their experiences on a recent project that we're currently working on as well. So for more information and on the schedule and what's happening, you can check that out on foundry.com/events. So we've got quite a few things lined up for April and May. So if you do have any questions on the events or any concerns, please do not hesitate to reach out to us directly on virtual.events@foundry.com. So just a couple of things today as well. The audio is pre-recorded, but there will be a live Q&A at the end that will be hosted by Ariel and Martin as well. Also, quick heads up that the audio is slightly more quiet than our microphone as well. So just giving you a warning, so you might just have to turn it up before as well. And that will be it. So I also just wanted to quick update that we have now extended our trials to 90 days. So make sure to check this page out. This will be for Katana and across all other platforms as well. So a reminder, it will be a 90-day trial. So make sure to check us out on all of the social media platforms as well. And if you want more information on insights, trends on the industry, you can sign up to our Insights Hubs and newsletter here as well. Also, just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our partners, Access VFX, ASWF, ACM SIGGRAPH, and VES as well. So if anyone is on this session, so a massive shout out to you guys. And thank you for supporting us throughout. And also, from a career perspective as well, we are still hiring. So we are looking for people with VFX engineering skills and VFX artist skills as well. So a couple of job titles listed here. So for more information and description, you can have a look at on our Foundry's career page, foundry.com/careers as well. And that will be it for me. I'm going to end my introduction with a very short video from a case study from RodeoFX and why they use Katana on their pipeline. And after that, the stage will be all yours, Ariel.
I think Katana is the best software for lighting on the market. It's great to be able to actually manage hundreds and hundreds of shots while being able to keep a non-destructive workflow. So if you bring in something in your scene, you start overriding, it's never definitive. So you can always remove it. It always takes into account what the upstream is.
I've been at Rodeo for 10 years now. From when I began, we were about 30 people, and now we're about 600 people. We began as a compositing and matte painting company, and over the last 10 years have evolved into doing all aspects of visual effects. Probably the most interesting part of Katana is in terms of how it scales and how robust it is. And as such, it's sort of become a linchpin of our current pipeline in terms of everything flowing through Katana.
We adopted Katana on the 7th season of Game of Thrones, and the first few weeks was a bit rough and people had to do things manually. And then by the end of the project, everything was automated. The building of the scenes was automated. And by that point, like, nobody wanted to go back to the previous product we were using. It's more efficient. We can actually start lighting shots at a very early stage in the pipeline. So as soon as we have a very crude layout or even a previs, we can send that to Katana, start the lighting as the assets are being built. This is a game changer.
We try and find projects that inspire us as well as push our pipeline forward. We do as much as we possibly can to support a quality of life because we feel that having a balanced life is actually going to get us more productivity and more creativity.
For Aeronauts, I was the design lead for the show. The clouds are the lighting challenge because lighting clouds is not something we usually do. So what we ended up doing is a series of turntables as well as different lighting setups that we would use in different shots. So with Katana, we were able to run these automatically. So for a shot, we would say, okay, environment's ready, let's run the lighting checks. And then we'd get a bunch of turntables and then we could pick which angle we want, which intensity we want, and then look at that in continuity. We had a very short time frame to do it, and we had 200 or something shots to do, and that's where Katana was able to help us. We developed internally a few tools that will help us automatize everything. So launching 20 shots, for example, would happen in a click rather than happening in a few hours of manipulations, which would be very difficult to do with another software.
The fact that Katana is procedural, you don't have to redo everything every day. You just continue working, you just refine your lighting, your passes, your render layers and everything. So the work you do is never lost. This changes everything.
The industry seems to be driving towards adding a lot of content, mostly through streaming services at this point. We've kind of positioned ourselves in a way that we don't distinguish between a streaming series or a feature film. And the benefit is that because we haven't done that, when series come in or feature films come in, we can balance that across all of the people at Rodeo. Certainly over the last 10 years, moments of crisis, moments of stress, Foundry is one of the first companies that we can rely upon. As a company itself, they've been an incredible partner and definitely part of our growth.
Hi everyone, welcome to this session exploring what we can do with Katana. Today's session will be beginner to intermediate, so it's aimed at those of you who have already played around a bit with Katana. So if you haven't, I'd suggest listening to the Getting Started series on the Foundry Learn page, where there's a lot of additional learning material. So if you're an advanced Katana user, this session might be a bit basic for you, but if you're interested in checking out some new features, I'll be covering that too. So it doesn't matter what your background is, whether you're a student or practitioner in either animation, VFX, or even product, this session can still be useful. So I'll first introduce myself. I'm a creative specialist at Foundry, and what I do is visit studios and universities to demo Foundry software, as well as create content. So today we'll be building a Katana project, which is a car configurator. So to give you a bit of background, this demo was made when some of our clients from the automotive industry were interested in using Katana to build their car configurators. And the reason why I'm using this project today is because it's actually really good at showcasing a wide range of features in Katana. And I'm mainly going to focus on building this project as well as playing around with various existing and new features. So you can see I'm using a build from version 3.6, which is the upcoming version. So I'll be showing you a few features that are coming up. So the renderer I'm using is 3D Light, and I won't be using any custom tools. So what I'll be using is pure Katana with its 3D Light integration that comes with it out of the box. So if you have Katana, you have 3D Light. So I'm here with Martin Mayer, Head of Creative Specialist, who is helping out with questions in the chat. So as I go through this, please ask questions. Feel free to write them down in the chat or in the questions, and we'll be answering them at the end. So I won't start with a completely blank project. We'll be starting off with a look dev scene, which is something that's already in the Katana forums in the community section of the Foundry website. So if you haven't been there, it's worth checking out since there can be some really good information in there. So all the tabs that I have open are the tabs that I'll be using for this session. So when it comes down to setting up a scene, these are pretty much the only tabs you'll be needing. So if you've used Katana before, you'll know that this isn't the default setup, but you can easily move around the tabs by dragging them across to a preferred position, to split tabs, or to add them to another set. And then if you'd like to save the layout you just created, then you go into Layouts and Save Current Layout. And then you can choose a name for it. So here I have my own. So when I select it, I'll revert back to that layout. You can also expand a tab by hitting spacebar while hovering your mouse over a tab. Now, something that is new as of version 3.6, which is the upcoming version of Katana, is dockable widgets. So you can right-click on a tab and select Move Tab to, and I'll just keep it on the right. This means that when you hit spacebar, the tab will remain docked. Now I'm going to bring in my car assets. So there will be two different cars being brought in for this, the Equinox and the Bolt, but I'll just start with one for now. So we'll create an Alembic in, hit tab, Alembic in, place it in the node graph and merge it with the look dev scene by selecting them both and hitting M. Now if we hover over that node and hit E, we can see its parameters in the parameters tab. So we'll add a path for that Alembic file, so click on the downward arrow and browse, and then select the Alembic that you'd like to bring in. So I have two cars, but I'll only be bringing in the Equinox for now. You can then rename a node by selecting it and hitting enter, which is a nice shortcut. So when it comes down to bringing in assets, you can also use the Importomatic tool, which is a super tool. And if you've worked with Katana in a studio before, then you might have worked with a custom version of that. So with the viewer open, at this point we can start to understand the deferred loading features and why they're useful. Those of you who know Katana will know how quickly a Katana project will open. So this is mainly because Katana is not processing any of it. It's only processing the nodes and their parameters, not their geometry unless it's told to. So unless it's being called by the viewer or the renderer. Now this works closely with the viewer flag, which is activated when I hit V while hovering over the node. And that will show you the state of the scene at any given point. So if I expand the scene graph completely by double clicking on the root, we can now see the geometry appear in the viewer. So the geometry will be visible when the elements are expanded at the mesh level. So if I collapse a part of it, you can't see that part in the scene graph anymore. So this is useful when you have large data sets and you only want to process specific elements. But if you have something like this scene, which is not very heavy, then what I'm going to do is have all the elements visible in the viewer at all times. So if I activate the viewer visibility, Control-Shift on the root level, that will make all the elements visible in the viewer. So if I move the viewer flag to where I've imported the car, you can see that the look dev scene no longer exists at that point. So this is because it hasn't been merged yet. So that's just a little gotcha that if you're not seeing what you want here, then it's worth checking if you've expanded that part of the scene graph. And if you do have this expanded and yet you still don't see what you want in the viewer, then it's probable that you're not viewing at the right place. So moving back to where we were, let's scale the car down and we can use the Transform 3D node to do that. So I'll hit Tab, Transform 3D. Note that you can hit backtick, and on the keyboard that's the key above Tab, and that will link up the nodes together, and it just avoids having to find that little arrow when connecting nodes together. So in the parameters, drag in the path you'd like to transform by middle mouse button dragging it to the path parameter. And I'll make that interactive, and by selecting it in the scene graph, the manipulators will appear, and if not, then select them on the left. There's also the shortcut W, E, R, and T. Now some of you might be wondering what this is. So these are the snapping features available in Katana 3.6. So selecting the snapping tool will activate it, and then you can select the snap features you want to use. So I'll go for the select face, center, orient to normal. And if you're watching this webinar from the future and have this in front of you, but it's not snapping along the axis you'd like, then you can go into the preferences and modify that under Viewer Hydra and Snapping. So I'm quickly going to place the car here, And I might tweak this once the cameras are placed. So I'm just kind of loosely placing it. So we'll now quickly set up the rest of the scene. So create a camera. So I'm going to place it so that we are viewing the car from the side. Note that you can also import a camera in Katana in the form of Alembic or USD. So we've got a camera in place. We're now going to set up some lights. So create a Gaffer 3 node. So the Gaffer 3 node is our lighting super tool. Then right click on the box and add 3D light, environment light. And I'll set it to the Studio HDRI that I've got. And then we'll add a DR settings, which is the 3 light specific settings, and then the render settings, and set the resolution. And remember to set the adjust screen window parameter to adjust width to match resolution. And we can render. So right click live render on a node and make sure you send it off at the bottom of the node graph. So information flows downwards, so that will render taking into account all the nodes that you just set up. And then to set up the elements for live rendering, I will control select at the root level. So make everything, basically setting all the elements up for live rendering. So how can you see the rendered image? So you can either go into the monitor tab, or you can use the monitor layer, which is this little monitor icon on the top right. So the rendered image will be overlaid onto the Hydra viewer. And this feature came out with Katana version 3.5. So if you want to quickly render from another camera, this can be done using this icon. And as you switch cameras, you can see the rendered image from that perspective. Okay, after we revert that, you can also use this icon to move around and see elements that are out of the frame. Okay, so we'll assign a temporary material to this car since right now it's not assigned to anything. And for now, I'm just going to create a material using a material node. So I'll set it to a basic shader. And assign it. And this will give me a better idea of what those lights are doing. So I'll add another light. And go back to the Gaffer 3 node and add an area light. So I'll just place it. Now if this render is taking a bit long to come out, you can either go into the DR settings overrides to override the resolution and samples, or you can create interactive render filters. So both cases are really useful because they're only activated in an interactive session. So let's say you come back to your renders in the morning after a long night of rendering, but then realize that you didn't reset those values, then that isn't such a problem with Katana. Now let's subdivide this geometry. So the way to do this with 3D Light is to create an attribute set and change the type of the asset from a polymesh to a sub-D mesh. And this will be a good first introduction to Cell, and we'll be using them throughout this session. So Cell stands for Collection Expression Language, and it's a way to call scene graph elements either by using its path, a custom expression, or a collection. So I'll go ahead and create a custom statement, and I want to subdivide everything at the mesh level. So the double dash will look for everything below this point that includes the name shape. So the star is a wildcard and can pretty much replace any string within that level in the hierarchy. And we can also see what this expression is calling by selecting this little arrow. And it'll select those elements in the scene graph. Okay, cleaning up. So there's often a point where you're setting up these scenes where you should probably reflect back on the nodes you've just created and think, is this legible? Part of it is making sure the next person who's going to work on this can look at it and know exactly what's going on. So what you can do is set colors to your nodes. You can add backdrops to help navigate within the scene. So I'm just going to create a few backdrops. And you can see their parameters by double-clicking on the bar at the top. And then changing its color, its description. So once you have a few backdrops in place, there's a nice shortcut to help jump across them, which is J. And it'll pick out the backdrops created and also pick out their color. Another tip is when you have backdrops on top of each other, you can use square brackets to put it either on top or behind an existing backdrop. Okay, so next I'll set up graph state variables, which is a way to switch across different states and variations within your project. So the main thing that it's doing is switching across different parts of the node graph. And there are many different ways you can do the same thing in Katana, so I'll go through 3 different ways that you can use GSVs. And as mentioned before, there's a second car, so I'll bring that in and use a GSV to switch between both cars. So I'll add an alembic in, and I'll call in the bolt car. So the first thing to do is create a graph state variable within the project settings. So in variables, graph state variable, add variable, select the wrench and rename. And we'll call this car and then set both variables. So to do this, all you have to do is type them in and hit enter. So I'll type in bolt, enter. And then at the top, we can see the GSVs that we've just created. So going back to our variable switch, we'll set the variable name, which is now car, and set the pattern so that this input will be true for the equinox and this one for the bolt. And I can now switch across both cars. Next, we'll control the visibility of this roof rack. So in the project settings, we'll call this roof rack and set the variables to on and off. So this time we'll create a variable enabled group and set the variable name to roof rack, and the pattern will be off since we're going to remove the rack. So what this group will do is enable itself if the value is true. So if roof rack is set to off. So within that group, hit tab and prune, which is the node that we'll use to remove the rack. And then we'll connect this node to the rest of the scene. And in the parameters of the prune node, you'll recognize that this takes in cell references. And you'll keep seeing them across many nodes in Katana. They're very useful. So I'll put in the path I'd like to remove. So I'll drag this in the form of a custom expression. And as I'm doing this, I'm being very careful to make sure this is as agnostic as possible, so it could work correctly with both cars. So just to explain what I'm doing, a double dash will look at everything below this point and search for this keyword. So the more specific you can be, the more efficient your expression will be. So as we can see, this is picking up the rack, but also the fin, which is something that I don't want to remove. So what I can do is use a cell to subtract expressions. So in this case, I'm going to call the aerodynamic fin exactly the same way, but so once it gets to this level it'll look for anything that has the keyword aerodynamic. So the naming across the cars are somewhat consistent, so hopefully if I do this, it should also work on the other car. So if I switch, I can see that that is working well. So this kind of cell statement can be really useful, especially when you have, if you have consistency across your assets. So these are the kind of things that you can start to think about and start planning even before your assets get into Katana. And it can really speed up your workflow. So this consistency can either be hierarchy levels, naming conventions, or metadata in the form of attributes, which does actually exist for these two cars, and that will help us when we're assigning materials. In the meantime, I'm going to use GSVs to switch between different camera angles. So in the project settings, I'll add this GSV. So I'll call this camera and set the variables to front, side, and back. So the side camera is already done, so I'm just going to rename this camera. I'll call it camera_side. And notice that part of the string matches the naming on the variable. And then we'll set that camera within the render settings. Here, I'm going to call the cameras based on the GSVs. So I'll change the path for the camera, right click and set this to an expression. And then I'll add an underscore and plus project.variables.cam.value. So this is calling the grass state variable. So now this value is changing with the GSV. So I'll go ahead and create the other cameras. So I'll create the front camera and then the back camera. So we're now going to create a collection, which is a series of selections from the scene graph. So if later on you need to reuse that collection, then that can be easily done. And if you've watched the tutorial series called Core Concept, it used collections to split out scene elements to then use them to set render layers. So in this case, we'll set up collections for material assignments. And here's where we will get to work with arbitrary attributes. So before bringing this into Katana, the geometry was tagged with attributes. So as long as you make sure you export that attribute with the alembic file, any information that exists on that alembic will be visible and accessible in the attributes tab. And we can see that all the different parts of geometry have been tagged. So what we can do with cell is call any geometry tagged with that particular attribute. So in the case where both cars have different naming conventions, this is really useful because it would avoid dragging in paths for each element separately. So as long as there's consistency across the assets, it doesn't matter if it's through naming convention, structure, or attributes. As long as they're consistent, you'll be able to exploit that and get things done faster. It means you can build setups once and reuse them later. So I'll create a collection for the car paint material. So again, the more specific you can be with this path, the more efficient it'll be. So if you have a large scene, you wouldn't want it to cycle through the whole thing looking for a keyword. So we want to call all the elements that have the attribute car paint. So I'm going to search under root world geo assets. And then under that point, I'm going to look for everything that has been tagged with the attribute. So that's curly brackets, attr, and then geometry, arbitrary, variant, value. And we can now see what this expression is calling by selecting on this arrow. And you can also choose where the collection is going to go in the scene graph. So I've just left it on the root level. And then we can use this when we're assigning the material. So before that, I'm going to create a material for our car paint. So I'll hit Tab and Network Material Create, or you can type in NMC and I'll pick up the letters in caps. So this node is new as of version 3.2 and has seen some additional features since then. So I'm going to call this material car paint and set it to a namespace car. You can now find this material under the name car in the node graph, in the scene graph, excuse me. So with 3D Light, there's a shading node called car paint, specifically aimed for this kind of thing. So hit Tab, and you can see that all the 3D Light shaders are displayed. And I'll type in car paint. So I'll quickly populate the parameters. And looking back at the renderer's documentation can also be really helpful when doing this. So I'm not going to go too far into this setup. I'm just focusing on the building blocks for now. So if you are used to the previous way of setting up shaders, so previous to version 3.2 of Katana, note that the Network Material Create node does have forward and backward compatibility. So the only difference with this node is that it takes you to a different UI space, but the nodes are exactly the same. So you can copy and paste them outside the group just to see that they are exactly the same nodes. It's just the interface that's different. Now you can assign the material we just created with the geometry that has the tags car paint. And this also takes in cell statements. So what we can do is add a collection to that cell and drag in the car paint collection we created earlier. And like that, the material is assigned. So if something is not assigning the way that you'd hope, or if an object does not have, let's say, the position that you'd like, then you can select that element in the Hydra viewer, assuming that you have it expanded and visible in the viewer behind. Otherwise, there's a nice trick in the monitor called the pixel probe. So if you select it and then control left click to your rendered image, and it'll pick out the geometry that is selected at that point. So if you click on the arrow above and select in scene graph, this will highlight that mesh in the viewer. And because it's selected, you can then inspect the attributes to see its properties. So I used to use this feature a lot when debugging scenes, and it's really easy enough to pick them out, see exactly what's going on, and it'll also avoid having to expand the whole scene, especially if you're dealing with something really heavy. So going back to this material, I'll show you a few features that are really useful in here. So you can choose between different expansion states for your nodes by hitting Alt 1, 2, and 3. Hitting G will create a shading group. And as of version 3.5 of Katana, you can use a variable switch within the Network Material Create nodes. So to showcase that, I'll make different color variations for the car paint. So if I go into this group and figure out which parameters might change across different variations, I can promote those parameters to the group's interface. And that's by dragging the noodle into the input column. So then when I copy and paste this group, I have easy access to those parameters. So I'm now going to go ahead and create a yellow, blue, and black car. And I'm just going to do this really roughly and quickly. Okay, and when we're ready, we can place the output nodes for each of the group into the switch by dropping them, by dropping the noodles into this plus icon. And then we can then specify the variable name, as we did before, and the patterns, which we've not yet created. So it doesn't matter what order we do this in. So I'll go into the project settings and create a car paint GSV. And then I'll put in the variables. So that's red, yellow, blue, and black. And we're good to go. Okay, now as I switch between these variables, we can see that the shaders for the car paint is now updating. And we're now going to do the same thing for all the other materials. So create a collection for each of the tags, create a material, and assign the material. And as you can see at this point, I'm not doing anything crazy on the development side of things. I'm really just focusing on the building blocks. So I'll repeat all of this for the other geometry tags that we have. Now I'm not going to subject you all to watching me repeat this. So I'm going to open a pre-made scene. And in this scene, we have all the collections, assignments, and materials. And we'll merge the materials using a group merge just to declutter a little bit. And to do that, you can drag in nodes into it by shift middle mouse button dragging them. And we'll create a group stack for the collection create nodes. And I've already done that for the material signs. Now, what are these, you might ask? If you've never used child materials, this is something that you can use to create variations of the same material. So you can promote parameters within the network material create node, just like this, to then be used later on in a material node. So here I've cut a few corners. So instead of creating a unique material for each element, I recycled one that was already done and just changed a few parameters. So this is the child material, so it will create a new variation of the same material. But there's also an option to edit materials. So it will change an existing material as opposed to iterating into a new one. So this is mainly useful at the lighting stage if the lighter wants to tweak a few materials. And that also gives the look dev artist control as to what can be changed at that stage, making that handover a lot easier. But if you don't want to be limited when editing these materials, then you can use the network material edit node, which will be in Katana as of version 3.6. That is coming up. So drag in a material, and this will give you complete control over the network. So if you edit the contents of a node, it will be highlighted yellow, flagging the fact that something has changed. Otherwise, if you add a new node to the network, it will be highlighted in green. So if things are modified in the original material, those changes will ripple down. Okay, so if we look back at what we've done, we can now see how quick it is to set up the building blocks for this kind of project. And the idea is that you only need to do this kind of setup once. So let's say you have an entire city, then you can quickly prepare all the elements at the same time really easily. Okay, so if you're signing up for a free Katana trial, definitely check out 3Light. If you're a student, then you're eligible for the first year free license. And with that, you also get a 3Light interactive and render license. So for faculties who have the Education Collective, then you also have Katana and 3Light license, as well as 5 render licenses per collective. And on that note, it's time to wrap this up. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope this was useful. And we'll be making more learning material during this time, so please let us know what you'd like to see from us. In the meantime, Marta and I will take questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Ariel. That was lovely. Guys, please do not be shy. Make sure you pop in all of your questions in the questions tab.
Okay, yeah, so there is one which is there any resource for intermediate to advanced tutorials? At the moment on our Foundry Learn page, there isn't, but this is something that we are constantly building on. And actually someone asked about where to find Foundry Katana tutorials. So a good place to be looking for those tutorials will be on the Foundry Learn page. So please take a look at that and let us know what you think. And we'll always welcome to feedback. So let us know what you'd like to see from us, and we'll be more than happy to deliver. Okay, looks like this is a quiet bunch. Okay, there is a question. So how to assign material to a specific face of the object? So one way to do that would be to create a face set in Katana, and then to assign that face set to a material. But bear in mind that this might work with some renderers and in a specific different way. So worth checking out on their documentation to see if they have any different methods. Cool. Well, don't be shy. Keep asking questions. So Katana there is a Redshift plugin for Katana, not for Octane, unfortunately. May I get this car model and look dev scene? Unfortunately, these assets are not redistributable. But if this is the kind of setup that you're interested in, this is the kind of thing that you're interested in checking out, then we will be more than happy to set one up for you. Just let us know. And which version were we using for this demo? So this was using a beta version for 3.6. So this was also to kind of showcase some of the new features that will be available in the upcoming version, and that will be out within the end of the month.
Ariel, we do have a question from our lovely friend Hugo. Question is, any plans to integrate Nuke and Katana, at least the 3D system, a bit like Octane for Nuke or V-Ray for Nuke?
Martin, is that something that you'd like to answer? So there is no existing integration for Nuke, but that is something that is constantly in discussion. So do let us know if that is something that you're interested in. Martin might have a little bit more information on that, maybe, not sure. No, doesn't look like it.
Yeah, for some reason I was muted. Yeah, this is more of a well, as Ariel said, it's an ongoing discussion and it's more in the hands of product managers, but the more people ask for it, the higher is the probability of it being actually executed.
Is it possible to add background plate to cameras backplane in the viewer? So with the monitor tab, it is possible to overlay a rendered image with a backdrop with a background plate, but that isn't currently possible with the viewer Hydra. But this is something that we do want to integrate in the future. Is their student version license free? So if you're a student, then you do get a first year free license for the education bundle. So that will include Katana with its 3 Lite integration, as well as Mari, Modo, and Martin Filmian Nuke. Yes, Nuke. I think that's pretty much that's pretty much what's part of the bundle. So that is part of the Education Collective. Can you share download link? Yes, we can. So it will be on the education part of the Foundry website. And then it is under first year free. So if you're a student, then definitely take advantage of that.
Okay, so I think we have another one from Patrick. How well is Katana working with USD Shade, I guess?
Our USD integration is something that we are continuously working on. Right now, as far as I'm aware, there isn't integration with USD Shade. And this is something that you can check on the developer's guide in the Katana documentation to check out what it is currently supporting.
Oh, I think we've got a question here from J-Pal. Hi, can you share your mail? If you've got any doubts, you can shoot mail and clarify. Is that to Mr. Saha? You can also email to us as well if you have any questions or feedback on our virtual events email, which I will share in 1 second.
Okay, well, while Joyce is doing that, do let us know if you have any more questions.
We've got plenty of time, guys. Don't be shy. All right, well, I'm going to take this as a, oh, no. I'm going to take this as a no more questions then. Okay. Well, if anyone does have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us directly. We also have quite a lot of content and learning material as well on our website to browse through our website as well whenever you have a moment to. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining today's Skill Up. I hope you guys enjoyed it and got some insights to it as well. And hopefully we'll see you guys in the next coming webinars and sessions.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone, take care. Stay safe.
Stay safe, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.